Hello everyone, let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about microbial biochemistry. We've now finished up the first 2 units of the course. We've talked about microbes, what they are, what their features are, what prokaryotic cells look like, and eukaryotic cells look like. We've talked about the acellular microbes, the viruses. And now as we move into the 3rd unit, we're going to start discussing the inner workings of microbial cells. We're going to discuss genetics and we're going to discuss metabolism. And in order to do that, we need to have a basic review of biochemistry. Now, whenever I teach this course, I begin by surveying students and asking them about their previous experiences with science-themed courses. And I ask, what was the most difficult science course you ever took? About half of the students that I survey tell me that chemistry was the hardest course they took. Chemistry was the course they had the most difficulty with. And that makes sense because chemistry is a difficult topic. Biochemistry, too, can be a difficult topic to master. What I'm going to do today is try to convince you that, indeed, we as students of microbiology only need to master a certain portion of chemistry, a certain portion of biological chemistry in order to understand and master the science of microbiology. So let's jump right in. On this slide, on the right-hand side, you can see a drawing of the periodic table of the elements. This is often depicted in chemistry laboratories as a great big poster on the wall, and it's quite daunting to look at. One of the immediate things that becomes apparent to us as students of microbiology is that most of the elements in this table we don't encounter very often in living organisms. In fact, if you look at all of the living material on planet Earth, about 96% of it is made up of only 4 elements. And I have those 4 listed here. C for carbon, N for nitrogen, H for hydrogen, and O for oxygen. That's it. 4 elements make up 96% of all of the matter that's found in living things. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't see other elements inside cells. Of course we do. There are other biological types of elements like sodium and magnesium. We bump into phosphorus and calcium and potassium and lots of other elements. But most of the molecules that are important biologically are composed of only 4 elements. Those are the ones that we need to understand in terms of their chemistry. So if we thought about all of the molecules that were really important in living things, of course the very first molecule would be water, because life on planet Earth is entirely dependent upon water. In terms of other molecules that we find in living cells, the macromolecules immediately come to mind. And recall that there are 4 macromolecules. Those include carbohydrate, lipid, protein, and nucleic acids. And the nucleic acids, remember, are DNA and RNA. So let's take a minute and think about some of the terms that we need to know in order to speak in the language of chemistry. When I use that word element, for example, what I'm talking about is a primary constituent of matter, something that cannot be broken down any further. It is at its most basic. All of the known elements are displayed in that periodic table of the elements. Now, the term atom refers to something different. An atom is the basic unit of a chemical element. And if we look at the atom in terms of what it's made out of, all atoms are made out of the same three particles. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about carbon or hydrogen or oxygen or nitrogen. When you get down onto the atomic level, the structure is similar. There are three types of particles inside of an atom. There are protons. They have a positive charge. There are electrons. They have a negative charge. And there are particles called neutrons that are neutral. They don't have any charge. Now, the protons and the neutrons inside an atom come together and create what we refer to as the atomic nucleus. So the nucleus of an atom. And the electrons basically fly around, buzz around that atomic nucleus. Now, what about this term molecule? What a molecule is a combination of atoms that are bound together with what we call covalent bonds, strong bonds. So inside a molecule, there might be several different elements and a different number of atoms of each one of those elements. We can describe every molecule by using a chemical formula. It's just a description of all of the atoms that are inside any particular molecule. So, for example, H2O is the chemical formula for water. It tells us that inside a molecule of water, there are 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. There are 2 different elements inside water. There's oxygen and there's hydrogen. If you look at C6H12O6, that's the chemical formula for glucose. There are 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens inside a molecule of glucose. You could also say there are 3 different elements in glucose: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So we have to know what each one of these terms means so that when we speak the language of chemistry, we can understand each other. When you go to the periodic table of the elements, each one of the elements is represented by a symbol, by a combination of letters, sometimes a single letter and sometimes 2 letters. Carbon, for example, is represented by an uppercase C. Now, on the periodic table, in addition to that lettered symbol for the element, you're also given some additional information, including what's called the mass number and the atomic number. The mass number appears on the top, the atomic number on the bottom. Now, what do these numbers mean? Remember, this carbon atom that we'll think about has protons, neutrons, and electrons in it. It's simply the combination of those that make one element different from another. So in carbon, if you go up here to the top in the drawing, there are 6 protons, there are 6 neutrons, and there are 6 electrons. Now, how do I know that? The atomic number describes the number of protons that are in the atomic nucleus. And the mass number tells me the number of protons plus neutrons together in the atomic nucleus. So if I have 6 protons, my atomic number, and I have a total of 12 as my mass number, 12 minus 6 tells me that there are 6 neutrons in there as well. Now, if I'm talking about a neutral atom, in other words, an atom that does not have a charge associated with it, then I also know that the number of protons and the number of electrons are the same, because the protons have a positive charge and the electrons have a negative charge. So if I have the same number of protons and electrons, the positive and the negative will cancel each other out, and I will have a neutral atom. So in carbon, I have 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. Now, the other thing you can see on this slide is a different representation of a carbon atom shown over here on the right. And as you can see, this one has the same atomic number, but a different mass number. There are versions of elements on planet Earth that are referred to as isotopes of a particular element. Isotopes have different numbers of neutrons in them. So we talk about carbon-12, and we also talk about carbon-14. Carbon-12 has 6 neutrons in it. Carbon-14 has 8 neutrons in it. Just 2 versions of one element that happen to exist on planet Earth. Now, let's take a moment and think about electrons, because when it comes to biochemistry and it comes to metabolism, the electrons play a big role. Electrons move around an atomic nucleus in an atom, and they sort of buzz around in a cloud. It turns out, though, that while it looks quite random how these electrons are buzzing around, we can actually predict at any one moment where the electrons will be as they move around the atomic nucleus. These regions where electrons can be most likely found, are referred to as orbitals. Each orbital, each region that surrounds an atomic nucleus, can hold up to 2 electrons. In other words, each one of these orbital regions can hold a pair of electrons. Now, there are many different orbitals around an atomic nucleus, and we group these orbitals into what are called electron shells. So take a look at the diagram below. There's nothing here for you to memorize. There's nothing in this diagram that I'm going to ask you about on an exam. I just want you to see that this drawing is a representation of electron shells. And within each shell, there's a particular number of orbitals depicted by these sort of colored balloon-looking regions. What is important for us to take away from this slide is that each orbital, each discrete region that we can describe around an atomic nucleus can hold a pair of electrons. And that depending on the shell, there might be 1 pair of electrons, there might be 2 pair of electrons, there might be 4 pair of electrons, there might be 8 pair of electrons. It all depends upon which shell you're talking about and how many orbitals are in that shell. What should strike you is that it's always even numbers. It's always paired electrons. Now, the outermost shell around an atomic nucleus is called the valence shell. We care about the valence shell a lot because The valence shell can contain electrons that are sometimes unpaired. Unpaired electrons are unstable, and they are available for chemical reactions. In the drawing on the right-hand side, you're looking at an artist's depiction of a copper atom. So the artist has drawn for us an atomic nucleus in the center. And if you look very closely, I know it's hard to see, each one of these little red circles has a plus sign in it. So the artist is depicting for us all of the protons that are clustered together inside this atomic nucleus. Remember, there are neutrons in here as well. And surrounding that atomic nucleus, there are these gray shells. Remember, each shell has a different number of orbitals in it, and each orbital can hold up to 2 electrons. Take a look at the outermost shell, the valence shell. There's 1 electron out here. That's it. There's 1 electron, an unpaired electron. This is a problem for the atom because this makes that atom unstable. So this atom is ready to take part in a chemical reaction so that it can find a mate for this electron.